podcast. My name is David Adès, and this is Ali Whitelock, and we're going to be having a conversation. Thank you for weathering the storm and coming out on this evening. I'd like, first of all, to acknowledge that the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet tonight, the Darug, Gundungurra and Tharawal nations, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge also that their land has never been ceded. Now, I've been wanting to have a conversation with Ali for years, so this is my chance. We've never done it. She's going to share a few poems with us, of course, about her latest book, which, if you haven't got it, is right here, A Brief Letter to the Sea About a Couple of Things. Just question, do you all have copies of Ali's books?
Yes.
Do you have all of Ali's books?
I think I might have that.
So we're talking to the converted here, yeah.
Yes.
That's okay. So we're going to have a bit of a chat. Now, it's not that long ago, way back. Take yourself back to 2008.
Okay, I'm there.
You're there. No one in the literary world had heard of Ali Whitelock.
How awful.
We were all oblivious and unsuspecting.
To such talent, I mean.
Where were you hiding? It's fair to say, Ali, that you didn't come to writing early.
No, I did not.
No. As some kind of literary prodigy. You were secretly marshalling your talents. Then you smacked everyone over the head with your memoir, poking seaweed with a stick and running away from the smell. And in what seems like, no time, you followed it up with 3 collections of poetry, And My Heart, Crumples Like a Coke Can, Lactic Acid in the Calves of Our Despair, and now A Brief Letter to the Sea About a Couple of Things. How did this happen, Ali?
Well, how did it happen? I mean, it's a great question. So how did I even start writing anyway? I wasn't in any way writerly or artistic, or I wasn't even very good at English. In fact, I was removed from the English department for not being a good enough student. So I didn't do HSC English, and they put me into geography. So that and the direct quote was to make room for a student with more promise. I mean, back in those days, that was allowed. Like, you were allowed to say that. You couldn't hurt anyone's feelings in that way. Now, my feelings weren't that hurt, but I just went into geography because I was quite happy not to do English because I just didn't know what it was for. I didn't know how to interpret a poem, or it just made no sense to me to any of it. I'm lost for words, Dave. But anyway, and so I didn't do that, didn't do English, and then I just, finished school, blah, 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 and then my sister moved to London. I was living in Scotland at the time, and I just started writing letters to her. And I loved writing these letters to my sister. I didn't know then that I was even sort of, I can see now that was where the creative stuff lived, because I loved to be witty. I thought it was fabulously funny, and, I used to try to even illustrate the letters with, images of things. And I'm not a drawer by any stretch of the imagination, but I loved doing it so much. And I would type these things up on a typewriter, because those were the days of those things. And I sent them to her. And that was, and so when I think back to when my writing started, I was writing letters, and that's how that started. And I mean, that would have been, I don't even know when, that was back in the 80s. So, fast forward to 2007, let's say. And I was already in Australia, and I was working in hospitality jobs, and that was my thing. And that's why I'm very comfortable handing out the wine, Leslie. At events, I like to do that because that's my thing. And I always thought somewhere along the line, as we all do, that, we would amount to something fabulous in our lives, whether it be a rock star or, really cool TV personality, all of those things. I thought one day I will be doing something that is more interesting and more befitting my enormous talent. So I was carrying 2 bowls of soup to a table one day, and I had a blinding moment of, oh my God, you're carrying soup to tables, like that's what you do. And there was no disrespect around that, because it really served me very well indeed, hospitality. But, those moments of blinding clarity where you go, shit, like what are you doing? You have to do, surely there's something else that you could do. So I set about the process of looking for a creative thing. And back in those days, I thought being creative meant that you could paint. I didn't know that there was a whole sort of gamut of creative things. I just didn't come from that kind of background. And so I got onto the WEA. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah, and pamphlet used to come. Do you? Yeah.
Is that national?
Probably. And so, I think. And so the pamphlet used to come in through the door, and I thought, let's have a look at this and see if there's anything on here that would be, tickle my fancy. And so I went through the thing, and I did, nothing really grabbed me, but I thought I would try painting for beginners, because let's see if this is a thing for me. And so I went along, and I was absolutely no good at it, and I hated it. I had no interest in it whatsoever, so I didn't go back. And then I looked at the pamphlet, and I went, photography for beginners. I could be a photographer. I could be, like really cool, and be really interesting at dinner parties, all of that, And so I went along, and I didn't like that at all either, and I was no good at that either. And then there was something else. It was something like, cooking the noodles of Southeast Asia or something. I thought, I'll try that. Maybe cooking is my thing. I went, what am I going to do? And so I had some credit left from a course that I hadn't gone to or something. I thought, well, I'll have to use that up. So then I went through the pamphlet one last time, and there was this thing called creative writing for beginners. I went, I'll do it, I might as well. And I went along, and the first night just blew the top of my head off. And I don't think I've stopped writing since that night. So I just found the thing, my thing. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote until I had so much material that, and I think most first-time writers are writing about their personal experiences and their families, so that's not that unusual. So that was what my first story was. So someone said to me, you should stitch all those stories together and get them published. I had no idea how that would work. And somehow I stumbled on somebody who knew an agent who said she'd take me on, and I'm like, all right, and so she took me on, and she found a publisher. And so that was my first book. The memoir was published here in Australia in 2008. So that is the journey towards writing. It was like nothing, writing, book.
So almost accidental.
Yeah, it was accidental. I was on a real quest to find a thing that would bring my life meaning, for want of a better cliche. I felt like I had something else that I could do, I wasn't searching for something that would make me money. Obviously, I write poetry. But this has fulfilled me in ways I could never have imagined. And I do it every day, and I don't want to do anything else. But
So I was going to ask you, you start off with the memoir. How did you find your way to poetry?
Yeah, how did I? Well, I was one of those people who always said they hated poetry. So up until about, I guess, I don't know, how long have I been doing it? 5 years maybe? The first book came 5 years. Yeah, so until about 6 years ago, I was somebody who just, I'm not interested in poetry. It's for somebody else, not for me. It's obscure and it's strange, and I hate it. And then I started writing little short things, short bursts of really dense emotional lines started coming out of my pen, and I thought, I'm so embarrassed, like, is this poetry? Because I can't now admit that I'm writing poetry, having claimed to hate it for so long. So I went along to a thing that Martin Longford was running at New South Wales WestWords Centre. It was just a discussion about poetry for 4 weeks or something. And he goes around the room, why are you all here? And I said, I'm sort of writing things. I'm not sure if they're poetry. So anyway, it was confirmed that it was poetry. So then I thought, wow, I'm writing poetry. That's really fancy. You know, I didn't ever imagine that I would do that. And so I just went on to write and write and write. And then because I'd come from memoir, which is very wordy, and we need a bit of a story and a little bit of a chronology, what was wonderful about poetry was that you can just take a moment within an experience and write about that one moment, you know. And it felt to me almost as though what I was doing was boiling down an entire story until it would fit in the palm of my hand. That's what a poem felt like to me. It was just this dense emotional thing that I could just hold there. I didn't need the whole story anymore. I didn't, as we say in Scotland, I didn't need to take the whole cow in order to get a pint of milk.
Well, I was reading these poems again today, and they are stories. They're all stories.
Yeah, they're stories too. I mean, they are stories too, but, you know, if we take an example of my father's dying moments, which I do like to write about quite a lot, then, you know, I may not necessarily talk about the drive to the hospital. We'll talk about the last breath, you know, and there is story. I mean, many of mine are, that's true. But they're also densely emotional.
And you've got this thing where you've got these very long poem titles and book titles. And look, I was wondering about that because I've tried that. And I send off these poems with long titles to editors and they come back saying, no, less is more.
Well, just about the title or about the poem as well?
No, about the title. I can get rid of the title.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they don't.
How
They
rude.
don't like the long
No, I
titles.
love
So
the
how
long
did you get away with it?
Well, I don't actually get that many things published. Maybe that's why it's all becoming clear to me now. But, you know, I don't get that many published. I've had a fair bit of success with Irish magazines and American magazines. Very, very little published in Australia. Nobody wants it in Australia. And
I thought it was because they were all so gobsmackingly brilliant. That,
it's probably, I mean, that's what I tell myself in my quiet moments of desperation.
Well, that segues into, I think you promised in the Facebook posts about today that you would sort of talk about rejections. And you've got a poem about rejections.
I do have a poem about rejection. I mean, has anyone in this room ever been rejected?
Has anyone not?
I mean, shall we just paint the walls with the rejection slips, as John Berryman said? So this was in response to a rejection that I got a couple of years ago. And yeah, I mean, some rejections are very nice and some are just not that nice. Dear poetry editor, thank you so much for your recent rejection, received into my inbox on this, the last day of the year, and a time normally reserved for celebration. I was aware you would be advising poets on the outcome of their submissions around this time, and had taken the liberty of chilling a bottle of Veuve Clicquot for the moment your congratulatory email came through. I will confess, I expected your email to thank me profusely for my submission, but due to the high quality of my work and mediocrity of your magazine, you had taken it upon yourself, as is your duty towards the advancement of literature, to forward my poems to the Nobel Prize Committee. And it is not merely that you rejected my poems, more the cunty way with which you did. Our editors have made their selections. Yours were not selected. No, dear Ali, no, thank you for your submission. No, we look forward to reading more of your work in the future. There is a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. You may like to read it. May I remind you that without us poets contributing to your magazine for free, you would have no fucking magazine. I feel this is an important point. The least you can do is be nice. It won't fucking kill you. I hope your global warming themed issue is a great success, though without my two poems, I find it hard to imagine it will be. I have copied in my friend who was also rejected by you this morning. She will be taking things up with the Queen. Yours most sincerely. I wrote that when the Queen was still alive. Yeah, and
So-
so that is how, when my rejections come in, it's either an immediate, oh, fuck you, what would you know? Or, I pen a little imaginary letter to an editor. I mean, it's therapeutic.
No, I
recommend
was
it.
just wondering if you send that off with every submission now, just so that they.
I should just save everybody time. Send them to myself.
Did you want to say something about how you come to your long titles and?
Well, yeah, I don't know how I come to them. I think I come to them because they don't seem to belong in poetry. I think that would be the first thing. They're not really poetic. And I think somehow it's a bit of a fly in the ointment to the sort of, an aspect of the poetry world which doesn't interest me, which is maybe sort of a bit of a, I don't want to sort of fit into a kind of a traditional way of coming at poetry, if there's such a thing. I want to be on the outskirts of things. And I think there's something about, I mean, it's unconscious, I don't know why I do it, but for me it works. But it is something about, this could almost not be a poem, and I think I'm at some level trying to connect with other people who might not also want to read poetry, but might then read that, right? So there's something about that.
Is it hard work for you to come to a title? Is it a struggle, or is it sort of almost a natural thing?
I mean, sometimes a title will come before the poem, right?
Mm.
I know someone on this stage who had that experience recently.
Yeah.
So sometimes a title will come first. I can agonize over a title for a very long time, because a title is part of the poem. So if I'm working with anyone and they've got a beautiful poem and they've just given it a kind of a title that allows them to find the poem on their hard drive, then I'm always going to challenge that. So I think from the very, very beginning, let's give the reader a reward from the title, even a reward for even reading to the end of the title.
So it's kind of a hook?
I think it's a hook. It's a hook, and I don't kind of, it's a hook. Unconsciously. I'd just like to say I'm not intentionally manipulating anybody.
No, of course not. Who would have thought? I'm struck by how your poems are very rarely linear. They go off in all kinds of tangential directions. And which is a fun thing for a reader, because you don't know where it's going to take you. But I'm just wondering how conscious that is, how you decide which directions to go into and which tangents not to go into.
It's totally unconscious. It's totally...
So it's just the way your mind works?
It's a matter of not standing in the way of what the poem wants. So I would never sit down and have a sort of poem roughly planned out even. I'll just be going on what's a very strong emotion. And when you're writing and you might say, oh, that's interesting, I'm now sort of moving off and I seem to be in Africa when I started in Sydney. I say, don't bring the poem back to Sydney because it's where you wanted it to be. Go to Africa and keep going and see, let your pen take you somewhere. I am always operating from that principle. Don't stand in the way of the poem. Don't stand in the way of what wants to be written, especially if it's something which you might find either as you write or later as something that's even shameful. I always tell myself, write it. No one needs to read it. No magazine's going to publish mine anyway. It's right for me. It's about writing the most intimate thing I can write in the most honest way that I can write it, and I dare myself to put things on the page, and then I see how that feels.
I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think most readers would get that.
Yeah, and and if you're writing and you want to do that or you're scared to do that, do it. You can do it in the privacy of your own writing corner. Nobody ever needs to read it. But it feels great to get that on the page. And you can always walk it back a bit if you don't feel comfortable to put it out there. But I don't know. I've always felt that all writing for me is about the honesty of things. And if I wasn't writing my kind of scraped back, pared back truth and my prejudices and my loves and my hates, I don't know what I would be writing for, so I don't really know what that, for me personally, there would be, if I wasn't sort of, kind of opening myself up and being as honest as I can on the page.
So is the process intuitive?
Yeah, it's totally intuitive. It's the shortest answer I've ever given. Yes, it is.
So I'm interested in poetic voice.
Okay.
Okay. So you've been compared by Mark Tredinick to Charles Bukowski.
Yeah.
And elsewhere I see that, you're the comedic love child of Billy Connolly.
Yeah.
Who's about the age to be your father, actually.
I know. I love Billy.
He's 81, I think.
Is he 81
just
now?
had his
Yeah,
birthday today or something.
Yeah, is it today?
Yeah.
Well, he's still alive.
Yeah.
I hate it when I see his name trending. I think, oh God, he's going to leave us.
But I was wondering, I know that sort of my sort of finding my voice was a long process of kind of being influenced by a lot of other voices. And I was wondering how you found your voice and what the influences were in you finding your voice.
Yeah, look, I didn't have any influences because I didn't read, I wasn't reading in school. I didn't study English. I came at it with no rules. I didn't know. That's why I always say to you guys, there's no rules. Like, there are no rules. Say what you want. So I didn't have any influences. And I'm sort of not wearing that as a badge. I just sat down with a pen and paper one day and I just wrote my own voice, and I just, that's what I've always loved to do. I didn't even know that was a thing that you could emulate or perhaps adopt, different voices. I just didn't know.
So it's actually, in a way, it was not hard to find because it's just authentically you.
No, it was just me, and just being as honest and brazen as I could be, and I mean, funny. I like to think that some of the work is funny. It's important to me, and I would, I think in another life I would have been a stand-up comedian not because I think I'm terribly hilarious, but I love comedy enormously, and I admire stand-up comedians as much as I just admire them. And when I find one that I love, I watch them and watch them and watch them, and I observe every second of their timing, and the tiniest hand gesture that adds to the hilarity of what they've just said is absolutely endlessly fascinating to me.
And so because your voice is authentically you and there's no other you, it's a very distinct voice, isn't it?
I guess
no one else has that voice.
I guess yeah, nobody's got it. It's mine.
You have a liking for swear words.
Yeah.
And it gets into your poetry.
It does.
And I think about that because if I were to do it, it would fall flat in its face because it's not my persona. Yeah. And there's always a risk. So how do you know when to use them and when not to use them?
My husband always says to me, do you have to swear in the poems? And I kind of do, I think, is the answer. I think because it's me, it's actually how I speak, and you will find some poems with no swear words in them. Did you find any?
Yeah, there are a few.
So there are some, and it surprises me when I find them myself. I go, wow, because often when you're reading somewhere, if it's fancy and it's on the ABC, they do tell you to cross out the bad language. You're not allowed to do that on the ABC. But I don't know. I think, I grew up in a house of swearing. That could have been the name of our house, the house of swearing, every second word. And, west coast of Scotland, working class and abusive father and alcohol and swearing. If you can imagine the roughest Glasgow suburb, you can imagine what the language is like. That was not that bad, actually.
It's
when
like
you think
home.
Yeah, it's 100% like home.
I think you should read a poem, otherwise we'll just keep talking.
Yeah, all right. What do you want? Do you care?
No.
Does anybody?
They're all good.
Do you want a sweary one? Okay, all right. Okay, so we'll go for... we're recording this. So do we... I've already said quite a bad sweary word. Should we do another one? Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay, this is a really short one, and this is the worst language that you can get. This is called the word cunt. My friend Bronwyn and I discussed the word cunt on Tuesday after it had rained non-stop for 7 weeks, and my succulents were juicier than they'd ever been. I described the colour of the sea that day as eucalyptus, a sort of smoked mint, an opaque sage. She asks me what sort of a cunt thinks like that. She reckons I spend too much time alone. Then she says, well, since you're so fucking etic, how else would you describe the sea? A woman's heart, I said. A cauldron of cold fish tears. A crone in love with the moon. The sloshing fluid of God's inner ear. Thank you. That's a little sweary one.
Ooh, okay, wonderful. So we've moved to another book.
Yeah. That's kind of got a concentration of bad language and it's short. So.
I don't think anyone else was here at the time, but a few years ago, you and I were here doing a Poets Corner well, it wasn't a podcast, it was a live event.
Yeah.
And the theme was death, honesty, menopause, and the kitchen sink.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I want to pick up from that and ask you if there is any subject that is out of bounds for you as a poet. Is there anywhere you are not prepared to go?
Well, you know, the minute I find myself saying, don't say that, I have to say that. You know, and there's one poem in particular where I talk about, it was at the time of public beheadings and mass hysteria about, you know, forgotten the name now, Islamic State and all of that, you know. And I had written this poem. It was about an experience I had in Glebe, and I always go to the same coffee shop in Glebe. And around about that time, when we were all sort of scared of everything, there was a man who would come to that cafe, and as I sat down at the table, every 5 minutes he got up from his table and he kneeled on the pavement and he was praying to Allah. And that was terrifying to me, you know, because of the climate that we were in. And I was like, this is extraordinary. So anyway, the poem goes on. It's a poem which I feel when I read it in public, I'm taking a risk because people might be saying, what's coming here? You know, what is this? What is this, Islamophobia, or however, you know, people might have perceived that. But, you know, when we get through the middle of the poem, we come out, the poem's actually about my prejudices, you know, which are based on, you know, media, but the man became my friend, you know, and we would buy him coffees and he would, you know, share our cigarettes with him, and he just became this real gentle, lovely presence in our lives, you know. So anyway, and one day I was there with Hector, if we want to bring my dog Hector in. Hector appears in a few poems. But one of the first things he said to me was he pointed at my dog and he went, your dog very big. It was beautiful, you know. And then every time I came with Hector, he'd be like, your dog very big, you know. And so that's kind of through the poem, and we sort of end up, you have to read the poem. But for a while I worried about reading that poem in public, you know, as the kind of the world's climate changed and people got very upset about a lot of things. But when I would prepare myself to read it, I'd say, well, if it scares you, you have to read it. So, you know, in answer to your question, you know, I mean, if it's happening in my life, if I'm upset by it, if I'm loving a thing, if I'm hating a thing, I think as poets we can do something with that, you know, that's helpful.
Do you want to read that poem?
Oh, shall we? All right, great. I hope I don't cry. I forgot what it was called. This is called Please Do Not Pee in the Sink. In the cafe with coffee cups for lampshades, the sign that says, please do not pee in the sink. I'm going to start that again. In the cafe with coffee cups for lampshades and the sign that says, please do not pee in the sink, we take an outside table. We have been coming here for years. We consider this table to be ours. Today there is an unexpected madman at the table next to us. He is leaping to his feet every 5 minutes, kneeling in the middle of the footpath and praying to Allah. I tell my husband I think we should go, that the praying man in the unfashionable blouson is, I will confess, scaring me a little. My husband tells me I'm being ridiculous, like 4 years ago when the huntsman lay in wait for me in the toilet and he had to remove it before I could pee, and every time since I have gone, I take a torch, scan the front and back of the door, the inside of the toilet roll tubes, and under the wicker basket where I keep the Earth Choice toilet cleanser and the eco-friendly air freshener. We always bring our dog to this cafe. The internet tells us Muslims do not like dogs, they make their prayers impure. It is their version of us peeing in the sink. Our coffees have no sooner arrived than the unexpected madman is down on his knees again, and I leak involuntary squeals like air escaping from the mouth of an overinflated balloon, and my imagination, made fertile by too frequent watering, convinces me his unfashionable blouson is packed with explosives, and post-detonation there'll be skimmed cappuccino froth and body parts scattered the length of Glebe Point Road. In all the years we've been coming here, the daily special has never changed. Something about fettuccine in a mushroom sauce with pesto and a hint of Dijon, not Dijon mustard, just Dijon, as though the chef might wear a French beret and cycle to work with a string of onions hanging off the handlebars of his bicyclette. Next time we came to the cafe, the unexpected madman was there, and the time after that, and the time after that. And every 5 minutes he'd be down on his knees. Months passed like this, days drifted. We kept coming, he kept praying, nothing exploded. Eventually we came to enjoy watching mothers with strollers wide berth him and dog walkers drag reluctant puppies to the other side of the road. Then one day he rose, made eye contact, pointed at our dog, said, "Your dog very big." We nodded, he smiled. Next time he came, he offered his hand. We shook it, bought him coffee, shared our fags. Months passed like this, days drifted. Sometimes when I'd come along, he'd ask, "Where is husband?" I'd tell him he's at work, buy him a coffee. He'd smile, point at Hector, "Your dog very big." More months passed like this, more days drifted. One day he tells me he is looking for a job, asks me for $2, I give him 5. In his country, he is accountant, his English skills are poor, I worry how he will manage. I've taken to minding his stuff while he's down on his knees. I make sure no one touches his unfashionable blouson, his lighter, his fags, his Yale lock key. Yesterday when I arrived, he wasn't there. I looked up Glebe Point Road, saw him in the distance walking towards the cafe, hair combed, high-vis vest, working boots. He stopped at my table, pressed a crumpled $5 note into my palm, cupped his hands warmly around mine. "For you," he said, "I have job now." And he smiled, his charming Middle Eastern smile, pointed at Hector. "Your dog very big," he said. I couldn't have agreed more. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, I'm glad we got Hector in. We had to get Hector
We
in
had
somewhere.
to introduce him somehow.
We did.
That was unexpected.
It was. I didn't think we were going there, but I thought you were just going to read from your latest book, but this is good. It's kind of like a
It's a retrospective.
A
and I'm not
retrospective.
dead yet.
No. No rush.
Maybe that's when my books will really sell and all. That's what happens, isn't it?
Mine too. So you talked a little bit about how you need to be. It's a compulsion almost to be honest in your poetry, and it's often, if I might say so, disarmingly open and candid.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it feels like they're invitations to readers to come and join you in the situation that you're describing. I wonder if that sometimes tips over into a kind of poetic voyeurism into your life.
For me as the voyeur? Or
No, for your readers.
Readers? I'm not sure. I mean, certainly when I'm writing, I have a feeling that the intimacy is with myself, and I'm only ever writing for myself. I'm only ever trying to please myself, so I'm never thinking about an audience. And so once I'm really satisfied that the poem is as good as I can make it, I hope obviously it will go into the world and, one person will like it, or one editor.
Because you do, you share it.
Well, and you have to sort of develop that thicker skin, which is maybe it's not even thicker skin, but early on in my writing, it's my husband who said this to me, as you agonize when your first book's coming out and you think everybody in the world is going to have to like it or I'll die, And then he goes, well, not everybody can like it. Like, what are you even talking about? So there was something about that really lodged in my brain back then, that you can't please everyone. You might please 5 people, but I can only really, truly please myself. And if I put that on the page then, and it goes out into the world and someone else likes it or feels a connection to it, that's an amazing thing. But it's never the driving force.
Well, I've just been going over all the little blurbs you've got in here. I've got blurb envy.
Oh, do you?
I've got blurb envy.
Do you?
You've got so many people saying so many wonderful things about your writing.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And I didn't have to pay a single one of them.
There you go. Your poems, we've mentioned how that there's always a little story in your poems. They're like little vignettes, I think. And there are characters that keep turning up in all of your books. Your father.
Oh, yeah.
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 Your husband, Thomas,
Yeah.
keeps turning up. Hector keeps turning up. And I was just wondering about that. So, it's like you're working through stuff. So you're working through dysfunction with your father. You're working through your marriage with Thomas.
Yeah.
And you're working through your grief with Hector.
Yeah.
And it never ends, does it?
Yeah,
So
it never ends. And I wonder if I'm working through it, because personally, I mean, I feel as though I'm documenting it, and that feels slightly different to working through it.
so
I
you're
feel
stuck?
No, I feel like people often ask if it's cathartic. I don't know. I mean, the process of writing is what fuels me and nourishes me. So is that catharsis? I don't think so. But the everything that's happening in your life is the sort of rich mine from which we, So, yeah. Writing about my father has always it devastated me, really. Writing about him. And the more it devastates me, the more I have to write it. Because I feel like that's quite worthwhile.
Do you want to read a poem about him?
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah.
Is there any one in particular? I don't care.
You choose.
Should we do one where he's already dead? What would you guys like? Already dead or dying? Okay, let's do this. Where is it? I think it's in the old Coke can. It's getting a bit of an airing tonight. God. So when you're a migrant and you live so far away from Scotland, you always fear you're going to get a call in the middle of the night, the one that's the bad news one. So, yeah. So this is called Waters for Fish. As cliché as it may sound, I always imagined I'd get the call in the middle of the night, the one that would announce that you were dead or at the very least be dying. I'd be bleary-eyed, would thank the caller and hang up grateful that I am safe, my 17,000 kilometres away and geographically exempt from delivering your eulogy. From shaking hands with those I have no wish to shake hands with, I would not have to be seen to weep, nor to wonder at the choice of photographs someone else has chosen for your order of service, for these are the things that happen when you're gone too long. Weirdly, I was coming back to visit you, Mum. You'd been unwell, minor kidney failure, for fuck's sake. How many years have we been asking you to drink water? Water's for fish, you'd say. Not so smart now, are you? Then you made this miraculous recovery too late. I'd already booked my ticket to come and sit at your bedside, to hold your hand, to keep you company on your descent into complete renal failure. So my daughterly dash to Glasgow would become a holiday instead, the last of which was Spain, and too long ago, though I still recall the sweetness of the sangria, the paellas filled with prawns and crabs and bits of lobster I scraped to the side of my plate. And I know a holiday in Glasgow's not for everyone. Sure, we don't get paella and we don't get crabs, but we do get fish and chips and deep-fried Mars bars and unending poetry nights that run the length of Argyle Street and around the corner into Shipbank Lane. Excuse me. So I got onto Google and I planned. I booked myself on writers' groups, I'm so sorry, on open mics, circled poetry readings I'd attend. I'd hop across to Paris, maybe Berlin, fuck it, why not Barcelona? But a quick drop in to see you, Father, revealed you were a sliver of yourself, a flaked almond of a man, a fragment. Like someone took a photocopy of you, reduced it to A5, printed it in grayscale. You look like shit, I told you, embraced you. I know, you mouthed back. I didn't know you could no longer speak, that your teeth no longer fitted you, that you could barely swallow. Jesus Christ, pull yourself together, woman. And no one knew. Not even Margot, the annoying nutritionist who did the home visits that very soon, in exactly 9 days as it turns out, I would not be hopping across to Paris, maybe Berlin, fuck it, why not Barcelona, but would be delivering your eulogy. Oh my God, my voice is getting so... Delivering your eulogy, written by my sister and scheduled to be read somewhere between the Eagles, taking it easy, and John Denver, filling up our senses like sleepy blue oceans. And I am unsure. Fuck. I will make it past the most perfect and excruciating first line. He was no saint, our father, but he used to say he looked like Roger Moore. Oh my God. Sorry if that was excruciating for all of you. Isn't that weird? I mean, why now? Like, I mean, you know, this was, 2018. Certainly when I first read those poems, it was difficult for me. Following the years following on, it was a lot easier, but I'm surprised to kind of...
Yeah, sometimes they do that. They come back at you, these poems. Wow. Well, I think, seeing as we've had a mention of Hector and we've had a poem about your father, I think it's Thomas's turn.
All right, so, okay, let's do a Thomas poem. That's cheer us all up. Let's,
Yeah, that's...
Shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, this is I usually introduce this poem by saying, apologies to anybody who's had to listen to this in the past, Paris. She knows what's coming. So I usually say, before I came tonight, I asked Thomas which poems he thinks I should read, and he said, oh, why don't you read a poem about how much you love me? And then I say, well, I don't have one of them. And then I remember that I do. So this is Love in the Time of Celery. I always imagined my yellow brick road would lead me to a future, if not emerald, at least the colour of pale celery. Over time, the rich yolk of my bricks faded and turned to what Dulux might call malnourished eggshell. I met and married a migrant who cleaned bricks for a living, $50 for every 1,000 bricks cleaned. Sometimes he'd bring home a couple and keep them on his desk. I was too much of a cunt to see what it was he was really trying to say. He came to this country with no English, pas d'anglais. Ich spreche kein English. With time, he taught me how to be kind in 3 different languages. Through him, I discovered the heart of a shrimp is located in its head, that otters hold hands to stop drifting apart in the sea, that cows produce the most milk listening to REM's Everybody Hurts. After months teaching himself English, he got a new job cleaning out stables. When they asked how much English he could speak, he oozed his answer with all the ripeness of a French camembert. Not so much, he said, but the horses also, they are not speaking the English either. After the stables, he got a job cooking in a French restaurant when it was still compulsory to smoke in the kitchen. At home, he continued to keep 2 bricks on his desk at all times. Eventually, he gave in to my nagging to replace them with an objet d'art that matched the curtains and pleased me more. We went shopping and bought something from a shop that meant no thing, a statue of a woman wearing a crown, the torch in her right hand casting shadows that turned the room the colour of malnourished eggshell. Give me your tired, she seemed to say, your shrimps and your curtains. Give me your bricks, yearning to breathe free.
Do you miss the bricks now?
Thank you very much. No, I don't. And then, I got rid of them all. I mean, I actually feel quite bad about that now, because he was very attached to his bricks. And every time we sort of go down the street and we see some bricks, I see him look at them. Don't. No.
All right. How are we going for time, Ali?
Yeah, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. So, look, I have 2. I don't have many more questions, really, because perhaps we can open it up for questions. But before I do, just two things I wanted to ask you. I'm going to take myself completely out of my comfort zone. And, Ali, let's talk about sex.
Oh, my God.
In poetry.
Great, let's do it. You go for it.
Well, you go there in your poetry, and I just wanted to know.
Oh, yeah, I have one. Do I?
A bit.
Yeah, I mean, there is a poem there that talks about sex and some... Oh, yeah, well, I've got one called Sex in Bunnings. It's quite long. I'm not going to read it. It's too long.
No.
Yeah, but, I'm not really kind of, I think, a poet who's known for writing about sex. I mean, it pops in, but it's not my oeuvre.
All right.
It's not really the thing that I write about necessarily, but, yeah. I may only have 2, do I? 2.
Yeah, you have the one about...
I've got the one about the art gallery, responding
one.
to a painting by Lucien Freud.
Yes. Okay, and the other thing I was going to sort of ask you about is humour, comedy in poetry. I mean, I can't do it. It's not a thing that comes easy to a lot of poets. I think it's a very difficult thing to do well. Can you tell me how you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, again, it's I'm not consciously thinking about making a poem funny. It's an intuitive thing where I'll be writing a terrible thing about, my father's death, and it will, for some reason, occur to me that something funny should happen now. And I think that's just because it's how we are in that kind of working class part of, sort of fairly impoverished. Humour is everything, and it's black, and it's how you navigate life, I think. So I think it's merely that. I've always navigated my life sort of between this blackness and humour. And so as an extension of that, and given we've already established that I'm just who I am as I write, I'm not sort of, then it's just second nature. If you go to Scotland, have you been to Scotland?
No.
If you go to Scotland, and particularly on the west coast of Scotland, everybody's funny. It's extraordinary.
We don't have that in Australia.
Well, you do. But everybody... I just am sort of amazed by that. I got off the plane in Glasgow airport after not having been back to Scotland for 15 years. I was in Australia. I didn't leave here for 15 years. And I got off. It's kind of like funny, but in your accent is what I'm talking about. Clearly people are funny in Australia, but to hear people funny in my accent, and I think as I hear myself say that, I remember actually Billy Connolly saying that when he talked about wanting to become a comic, and there were certain comedians he would be listening to, and he went, they were funny, but they were funny in my accent. You know, he's a very working class Glasgow man, you know, rough as guts. And so there's something about blackness and sadness and trauma and humour getting you through that as a child and into young adulthood. It's just how I do it.
Yeah, so humour's kind of like shedding light on the black.
Yeah, I don't... What's that? Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's a good way to put it too. Yeah. So, yeah, a vehicle, a sort of an unconscious vehicle. So it's just what we do, kind of, you know, and sort of growing up there in those particular conditions. You sort of just have to sort of do a bit of a tap dance and make somebody laugh.
So it's a survival thing?
I think so. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Any requests for poems?
No questions.
I was thinking about your Billy Connolly when you read the poem "Don't Piss in the Sink."
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful example of how you used that idea of those segues of going off, and now we're flying off in this direction. We're thinking about dogs, and now we're talking about you know, it just flew in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So I like those little paths off, and then to kind of bring it to a kind of a completion, I suppose. But I think there's always a bit of juicy gold in those when you veer away from where you thought you were going. You know, let your pen go there, and then just see if it comes back. It doesn't have to, but I think that's a product of that. My sort of writing approach is to not stand in the way of the thing. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, Andy Capp. Wow. Yeah, we did.
Oh, can I ask you, Ellie, do you read poetry now?
Yeah, I do. It's all I read, really. Oh, it's not all I read now, but in the last couple of years I've started reading other stuff, but it's predominantly poetry. Yeah.
So from going to not reading it at all?
Yeah, I know. And I mean, that's what I say to people now. Like, it's not that you hate poetry, you just haven't found the poet. A poet that, you know, blows the top of your head off. And when you find that, I think you can't claim to not like poetry, as I did for a long time.
Any last words, last poems?
Do you want me to read a poem?
Sure.
Do we want to read one? What shall we read? What would we... We should do one from this book.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I do have some that I thought I would read. Well, look, let's just do this. He's dead now. The difficulty in drawing a dead man from memory. Before I do that, I'll tell you really this poem. I went to see a play in the WestWords Centre some years ago. It was by a Dublin group, and it was it was called Have I No Mouth? And it was one of the most extraordinary titles of anything I'd ever... I wasn't even writing at the time. I don't even think I'd published my first book. But basically 3 people on stage, a son and his mother in real life, and their therapist from real life. And they were navigating the grief because the young guy had lost his dad. And it was about that. It was unbelievable. And there was one part in the stage play where the boy had his mouth taped up and he was just holding up cards for what he would say. I found that so powerful. And I thought, great, I'm going to rip that off one day. So I had sort of been collecting these fragments of things that I would one day put on my own stage show and do that. But anyway, it didn't happen. So those lines have gone into this poem. This is what the poem is made up of. The difficulty in drawing a dead man from memory. Oh, did you smash it? Okay. This is a picture of my da. I drew it from memory. Apart from the straw boater he has somehow started wearing since he died, it is a very good likeness. Here is another one. This time he is holding a microphone, his mouth jammed open for all eternity, mid-phrase. He was a very good singer. His favourite songs were Ave Maria and There Goes My Everything, but only when Elvis sang them. He used to sing them to Mum at parties and when he was drunk, which is to say, always. Yesterday, I cut him out of a photograph, glued him to a sheet of lined paper, drew a set of wings on him even I could see were too big. Then I took my biro and filled the sky with 1,000 black M's, hoping for a murmuration of birds. I decoupaged the Massey Ferguson 241 tractor from the Farmer's Weekly I bought months after he died, when I was still looking for a connection to something. I glued it halfway up the page. Somewhere not quite heaven and not quite earth. I am not much of a drawer, but I tried to capture the likeness of the puppy dead on the kitchen floor. The difficulty in trying to capture a dead man's violence from memory is you are not meant to speak ill of the dead. You are meant to find a way to sketch their better angels, no matter how fleeting their appearance.
Thank you. Thank you so
I'm
much.
all exhausted. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was wonderful.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Such a stormy night. Thank you. Would anybody like a glass of wine? I can get it for you. Can't. Are you going to get one? Oh, yeah, please do. Okay, thank you.